Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Gaffer Gear. Today it's another gear review and it's a tube light from SGC. Alright, so what are the points of difference between this and other tube lights? Well, if you've got Aperture products, this light runs off the same phone app as the Aperture lights. It also has DMX connectivity and the battery is removable. All right, so let's get straight into the pros and cons. And for a lot of people, I think the first pro is that this thing works over the Sidus Link phone app, which we'll talk about later. So what that means is you don't have to have a separate phone app to run this light. You can use it with your existing phone app if you've got Aperture product and you know it's a good phone app. All right, so that's a big pro for a lot of people. Now, if you're like me and you absolutely hate phone apps, this thing has DMX connectivity. Now, the DMX profile is pretty good. It's a HSI CCT crossover profile. It is a little bit steppy though in its fades, but it's good for setting up scenes. All right, the next pro, particularly for I think a lot of people, would be the fact that the battery is removable. So you don't have to buy a whole stack of these if you want to run them off batteries. You can just buy the amount that you need and then buy batteries at an additional $50 US each. So that's what they tend to sell for. Now, in terms of battery runtime, running this light at full power, I get between 2 hours and 40 minutes and 2 hours and 58 minutes per battery, depending on what CCT I'm running at. Now, in terms of another pro with the batteries, you can run this thing off AC power and simultaneously charge the battery inside the light, so you don't need an external battery charger. However, you can buy a separate external battery charger if you want to charge your other batteries offset while you're using this thing completely wirelessly. All right, the next pro for these is the color render. The lowest TM30 color vector score was 95. Now, that's the highest color vector score on a lot of lights. So the lowest was 95, the highest was 96. That's across the entire range. Now, the next thing I was concerned about that I thought could be a pro or could be a negative is the display is on the front where the light's coming out from. So initially when I saw that, I thought that was quite stupid because if I'm working in the dark and I'm making adjustments, say to my brightness, I'm going to get blinded by the tube. Now that is not the case. I can see the display clearly even though the light is running at 100% brightness. It is not blinding me. And the reason it's not blinding me is because the display is bright enough that you can actually clearly read it when the light's at 100% brightness. Now, I do have to say, initially, I thought this was a really dumb idea, but I'm starting to warm to it now because let's say you've got the tube rigged into a wall like this and the controls are on the back. If I want to change something, I have to de-rig it, but not with this tube. I can just access the menu because it's on the front here and, for example, change it into color mode. The next plus for this tube is the diffuser is nice and dense, so you don't see all the LEDs if they're in shot. You get one nice clean light source. Now, the next advantage for these tubes, particularly at their price point, is they have a CCT mode with plus minus green magenta. Now, here's where they're different to other tubes at this price point with a plus minus green magenta. When you dim these, the ratios of your plus minus green to your white light stay the same. Now let's get into the cons, and I've really only got a few. Now the first one is something that might not affect you, but it's something that I prefer. I like my tubes to not have a big section at the end where light isn't coming out. I like to have a continuous light for as far as possible, in case I've got multiple tubes butted up. I don't want to have a gap in the light source. So that's a negative, particularly for me. Now the next negative is to do with using these on the phone app and how they desaturate. So if you're using the HSI mode or the color wheel, for example, these desaturate to a different Kelvin than the Aperture colored lights do. So these desaturate to about 5,200 Kelvin. So if you're using this on the phone app with other Aperture colored lights, like for example, the MCs, and you're running full saturated colors, you're going to get a pretty good color match. But if you start desaturating, these ones aren't going to match the Aperture lights. All right, so let's go through how much these things cost, what they are, and what you get for your money. All right, so this is the P60. So what does P stand for? It stands for Prism, which is their full RGB color range of tubes. The 60 stands for 60 centimeters. So from one end to the other, it is 60 centimeters. They also have a 120 centimeter version. Now, if you go to their website, you can see all the kit options you can get. Now here we have the basic single kit for the P60. So in this kit sells for 500 AUD or about 270 US dollars. So we get the tube, which has a built-in battery, or sorry, it has a battery in it, which you can take out. The tube is made of a very solid metal construction on the back, or an aluminium construction. So it's a very strong tube, very well built. Now you also get your power supply, which you can use to charge the battery when the battery's inside the light. You get your regional power cable, and you get a clamp to mount the light to a stand or to mount it to any of your rigging stuff. Now, with this, you get a stand mount, and the stand mount can attach to the clamp at 90-degree angles or at 45-degree angles. Okay, so very simple to operate, very simple to use. All right, so let's quickly go over some of the features and specifications of the tube. So this is 18 watts. It has a CCT mode that goes from 2700 Kelvin up to 6500 Kelvin, which is adjustable in 50 Kelvin increments. It also has full plus minus green capability in there as well. Now the HSI mode is a full HSI mode. It has 360 colors, which you can desaturate in 1% increments. And it desaturates to a white color emitter. It doesn't desaturate to some ugly RGB mix. It also has the run-of-the-mill special effects that we've become accustomed to having in a good RGB tube. So this is the fire effect, for example. Now the effects are not the greatest that I've come across. I'd give them a 7 to an 8 out of 10. So this is the fire effect. Now to get an even better fire effect, I would suggest having multiple tubes all running slightly differently to each other so that you get your shadows licking from one tube to another. That gives you a really good fire effect. Now the tube also has DMX capability as well as Sidus Link capability. All right, so let's have a very quick look through the control system on the light. So you've got your master on-off switch. Now below that you've got a blackout button. So you can have all of your settings preset into the light, press the button and up comes the light. So a very quick on-off setting there. Now with this button here, if you hold it down, it shows you your battery status. Okay, so a lot of people have missed that in reviews because they haven't read the instruction manual. Now that battery status also tells you if the light is charging. Now we've currently got CCT selected. If I want to change my brightness, I press the tick button. That gets me down to the next thing in the menu. Now I use the plus and minus buttons to do my adjustment for that parameter. Now it adjusts in 1% increments. Now if I want to get down to a color temperature, then I press the tick button again. Now I can adjust my Kelvin in 50 Kelvin increments. And below that is plus minus green. Now if I want to get to another mode, I just press the tick button and return, and then I can select HSI. Now same thing applies with the HSI. I can use my buttons to change the parameters. Other modes, we've got this CTP, which is a quick color presets. So for example, I'll go down to here. We've got quick Kelvins and quick primary colors and secondary colors. So we can easily find a color quickly if you're just after something basic. So let's go back up into the main menu system here. We've got effects. So we've got things like fire effects, cop car effects, things like that. I won't bother going through those. They're pretty standard. Set is for things like your DMX address and DMX mode. BT is Bluetooth. So that's for things, that's for operating the phone app, the Sidus Link phone app. And we've got info, which is the language that we're running and the version number, as well as factory reset. Okay, so let's have a quick look at how this thing goes over the Sidus Link phone app. So as you can see there, it's been identified. Now let's turn the tube on. All right, so we've got our intensity that we can adjust. We've got our CCT that we can adjust. Now here's the thing to note with the CCT. I'll just turn the other lights in the room here off. Now we're in standard, so that is the range that the tube can actually do. So the tube is capable of. Now we can go to expanded. Now what that does is it uses the color emitters to extend the range. So you do get a much more extended range. So we're looking at 1,500 Kelvin there, all the way up to 20,000 Kelvin. But your color render scores are very heavily compromised in this mode. So if you want really good, good color render, stay within the standard parameters of the tube. All right, and we've also got our plus minus green. Now you've got your gels selections. The gel selections are very sort of lame in this Sidus Link app. They're all just CTOs, CTBs. There's no like Lee or Roscoe gels library. Now we've got our color mode here where we've got our color wheel. So, you know, very funky, very easy to control. Now the next thing that's sort of pretty cool with this is we've got our effects menu. So let's, for example, let's see if we can find the fire effect. Now you might not like the fire effect that was in the tube itself. Well, you can use the aperture fire effect over the phone app, which gives you smoother roll-offs. So as you can see, it works okay over the Sidus Link. All right, so let's see how this thing goes in DMX mode. Now, in order to run it in DMX, you're going to need an adapter cable. So these adapter cables are the same cable configuration as the ones for quasar tubes. Okay, so they should be relatively easy to find. Now, in terms of your DMX profiling, we've got two profiles, an 8-bit profile and a 16-bit profile. So here's the profile map for the 8-bit. Channel 1 is your brightness, channel 2 is your CCT, channel 3 is your plus minus green, channel 4 is your hue, and channel 5 is the saturation. So in a nutshell, it is a CCT HSI crossover mode. So you can dial in any Kelvin with a plus minus green value and then saturate a color on top of that. Now, in order to run this off DMX, you need to set it in the menu, which is a little bit tricky to find if you haven't read the instruction manual. So what you do is you go to the set menu, make sure you're in slave, not master, and then go down to wire set, then click plus, and then turn your status to on, and then it will run off the DMX. Now, you've also got here your address and your profile selection. So P1 is 8-bit, P2 is 16-bit. Now for this test, I'm going to be running it in 8-bit mode via a Lumen radio receiver. Let's start off with instant 0 to 100% commands. And as you can see, there's no stepping in the light engines. Let's now do a 5-second programmed fade to black. And it is a little bit steppy at the end. Let's do a 5-second fade up. So right at the end of the fades, it is a little bit steppy. Now let's do a 2.5-second fade to black. And very steppy. Let's do a fade up. Now a 1-second fade to black. And a 1-second fade up. Let's do a 0.5-second fade to black. And a 0.5-second fade up. Now let's do instant CCT changes, and as you can see, there's no step in the light engine. And this is going from 3200 Kelvin to 5600 Kelvin. Now let's do the same thing again, but in a 5-second program changeover. And back the other way. Now let's do a 2.5-second CCT changeover. And back the other way. Now let's do 1 second. And back the other way. And this is 0.5 second. Now let's add a color hue. And as you can see, there is no stepping in the light engine between hue mode and white mode. Now let's do a 5-second change to a hue. And we're now doing a 5-second change back. Now let's do the same thing, 2.5 seconds. And a 2.5-second change back. And now a 1-second change. Now, just a couple of things to note with the DMX. It does have a master and slave mode, but I've only got one tube, so I can't test that. Now, in terms of signal loss, this tube will retain its last command until it is taken out of DMX mode. So that is an absolute plus. Now, in terms of negatives, this is one of those tubes where if you switch it over to DMX mode, you don't get displayed on the screen the output values. So why that's a negative is if your controller does not have a profile, you're probably going to have to guess what your Kelvin is. Okay, let's have a look at how bright this is, and I've taken the readings at a distance of 1 meter. At 3200 Kelvin, I got 327 lux. At 4400 Kelvin, I got 371 lux. and at 5600 Kelvin I got 403 lux. Okay, let's have a look at how accurately the light dials in a CCT. Between 2700 Kelvin and 3000 Kelvin, the light was out by an average plus or minus 36 Kelvin. Between 3050 Kelvin and 4000 Kelvin, it was typically out by minus 79 Kelvin. Between 4050 Kelvin and 5000 Kelvin, it was typically under by minus 111 Kelvin. Between 5050 Kelvin and 6000 Kelvin, it was out by on average minus 143 Kelvin. And between 6000 Kelvin and 6500 Kelvin, it was out by on average minus 126 Kelvin. Now let's take a look at our TM30 color render scores. Between 2700 Kelvin and 4400 Kelvin, it came in at 95. Between 4450 Kelvin to 6300 Kelvin, it came in at 96. And from 6350 Kelvin upwards, it came in at 95. Now let's have a look at our white points measured in delta UV. Between 2700 Kelvin and 3000 Kelvin, it starts out at plus 0.0001 delta UV and then drops to minus 0.0018. Between 3050 Kelvin to 4000 Kelvin, it averages minus 0.0021, which means the light is slightly magenta to less than a 1/8 correction gel. Between 4050 Kelvin to 5000 Kelvin, the light then shifts up to the daylight curve. It starts at minus 0.0020 and finishes at plus 0.0019. Between 5000 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin, the light is tracking close to the daylight curve, with an average of plus 0.0031. Now let's take a closer look at some of our CCT values, starting off with the lowest value that we can dial in. When I dialed in 2700 Kelvin, I got 2738, with a TM30 color vector score of 95% average color accuracy with an average 105% saturation. Here are the CRI scores. R9 and R11 are below 90. As you can see, it's got a very healthy spectrum distribution, and the white point was smack on, with a delta UV of 0. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3191, with an SSI score of 85. The TM30 color vector results, 95% average color accuracy with an average 105% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores. R4, R8, R9 and R11 are all below 90. It has a very healthy looking spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0017, which means the light is slightly magenta to less than a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4325. The TM30 color vector testing suggests an average color accuracy of 95% with an average 104% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores. R9 and R11 are below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and as you can see, it has a lot of meat. And the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0008. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5414 with an SSI of 75. The TM30 color vector results were 96% color accuracy with an average 103% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R11 is below 90. And the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0022, which puts it in that safe area above the Planckian curve and almost on the daylight curve. When I dialed in the top value of 6500 Kelvin, I got 6336. The TM30 color vector scores were 95% average color accuracy with an average 102% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R11 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0015. Now let's take a look at how accurate this light is in its HSI mode. So one thing I want to point out is with the manual desaturation, so that's desaturating it off the controls here and over the phone app, it does desaturate to a bit of an odd white point. It desaturates to 5236 Kelvin with a delta UV of plus 0.0017. Now, as you can see here, it is desaturating to a white emitter. So it's not desaturating to some ugly blue RGB color mix like a lot of lights at this price point. So I won't be giving you any desaturation values as this doesn't line up to any of the standards on my meter. But there is one thing that's worth pointing out. If you're running this over DMX, you can select any Kelvin with a plus minus green value that you want as your desaturation white point. Red, which should be 0 degrees, came in at 1 degree. Green, which should be 120 degrees, came in at 116 degrees. And if you have a look here, I think you can see why it was out. Blue, which should be 240 degrees, was smack on 240 degrees. Yellow, which should be 60 degrees, came in very close at 67. I would suggest dialing in 50 if you want a really good yellow. Cyan, which should be 180 degrees, was ever so close at 176 degrees. And magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in at 283. Okay, so that's another gear review done. Thank you for watching. All right, so one thing to point out, SGC are now an independent manufacturer. They're not part of Quasar Science. So they've got their own design teams working on lights into the future. So they're not going to be a one-trick pony. They do have other products coming down the track. All right, the next review should be on the Godox 600 watt COB, very compact 600 watt daylight COB unit. And then after that will most likely be the what have I got there? The Nanlite 150 watt Forza, which by itself doesn't impress me that much, but with its projection mount, it is something special. All right, take care everyone. See you on the next ep.